As we get towards holiday season and Christmas edges ever closer, do you find yourself worrying about that crazy uncle with the weird beliefs that you have to talk to over the Christmas table and trying not to spark off a huge argument? Well, if you're getting worried about it, then this one right here is for you. How to Have Impossible Conversations by James Lindsay and Peter Bogosian. Let's check it out. Alrighty guys, so I have to say, number one, I'll take my hat off so you guys can actually see me, but yeah, I have to say that this might just be in my top 5 books for the ones I've read for this entire year. This is an absolute master work, and I'm not even sure if they were actually trying to make a self-development book, but they've made one of the better ones. So for those of you who don't know who Peter and James are, kind of in the psychological social sciences space, and Peter Bogosian, his first book is called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and essentially it's about how most religious people have a kind of Saturday morning cartoon version of their faith. They've never actually read the actual material, and therefore they don't really understand how dark some of these books get. But again, that's not about this. This is Peter and James's take on how to have complicated discussions. So a lot of Peter and James's work is kind of in the deprogramming space and deconversion area. So they both teach critical thinking and things like that at university. So they're getting people in the right headspace to think about complex topics like religion and how it affects the world at large. Some of the medical establishment and politicians have found out the hard way over the last couple of years. Conversation is both an art and a science. And like I said in the intro, we're edging towards Christmas, and so I thought I'd give you all a little bit of advice around how to have productive arguments, essentially. I'm very interested in having conversations about people's belief and their belief systems, and kind of really getting down into what's called epistemology, or the science of why people believe what they believe. Yeah, it's something that I've become really, really interested in, and I mean, like I said in my other video, that once you stop learning, you're kind of dead in the water, especially in the creative spaces. But I think it crosses over into your friendships and things like that. I mean, I just explained to my son this morning that the people that you have in your life when you're 10 years old, you're 20 years old, 30, and kind of every decade, you kind of almost have a whole influx of people. There might be, a few people here and there that stick in your life for the long haul, but for the most part, you're gonna kind of have a new group of people around you every 10 years or so. But for those that you want to keep in your life, over the years, you're going to probably have to have some really complicated discussions and arguments. So this book is primarily about having productive discussions between people of very different belief systems. And as we push further into the social media age, I think that is desperately, desperately needed, because we're kind of all living in our own little bubble and everybody's screaming past each other, but no one's actually listening. So we desperately need to work out how to have productive disagreements. Just the concept of listening. Now, in the social media age, a lot of us, like I said before, we're just constantly screaming past each other, and we're desperate for acknowledgement. We're kind of just desperately screaming into the world, asking, am I a good person? Am I a good person? We want that confirmation. But you need to get it out of your head and just be a human first. And that gets us back to the topic of listening. It's a skill that we've seemingly lost in 2021. And as opposed to having an argument, sometimes people just need to vent, and you need to be aware when someone is not interested in an argument, they're interested in getting something off their chest. And there are techniques, like you don't want to take off the topic away from them, and you need to let them speak. But you can ask them questions like, can you go a little bit deeper on that? Or how did that make you feel? And also just repeating the last sentence that they said back to them, because it really does show that you're actually listening. Because a lot of what people will do is, like I said, they don't actually listen and they just jump to their reaction. As opposed to listening to what the person's saying, they're thinking in their head what they want to say. Jordan Peterson covers this quite a lot, and the techniques that he uses as a therapist to get people to open up quite a lot. And like I said, listening seems to be a skill that we've lost, and we desperately need to get it back. Because otherwise the shouting's going to get worse. We're only going to see what our differences are. And like I've said to the people in my life that are religious, is that you name pretty much anything, I guarantee you we probably agree on it. Like, we would agree on 99.9 reoccurring % of topics, but there's just a couple of weird little ones that are kind of hot button that we completely disagree on. The book covers topics such as reframing, which we spoke about in The Obstacle is the Way, and how conversations need to be less adversarial and more kind of research-based, and really trying to get inside someone's head and see how they think, as opposed to this is a combative argument that needs to be won. Because when you if you humiliate someone in a conversation, they're going to actually just double down, dig their heels in, and they're going to try and argue harder as opposed to rethinking their own beliefs. Something that I've brought up before in both Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris's work is the idea of strawmanning and steelmanning. And strawmanning is when you build a caricature of someone else's argument and you just attack that. It's kind of like you amplify the silliest parts of their arguments and you just attack that, as opposed to steelmanning, which is the process of repeating verbatim exactly what another person said in the argument so you're repeating it in your own voice, because that helps you process their argument in your own head. And I think that is a skill that is desperately needed in 2021. So one of the things they mention is the golden rule in conversation, and that is talk to people how you'd like to be spoken to. Don't cut people off, don't finish their sentences for them, don't do the whole "so what you're really trying to say is," because 9 times out of 10 you will get it completely wrong and you're nowhere near what they're trying to say. They just haven't articulated it very well, and most people who can't articulate their arguments very well will have trouble in this type of scenario. Yeah, and relating to the golden rule of conversation is that no one will care about your argument until they see how much you care about theirs, which is... it sounds like common sense, really, and it is, but common sense is not very common these days. So, I quite liked their section on what's called the Unread library effect, in that somebody has been introduced to a topic, and just by having access to the information, they kind of start arguing as if they've already read it when they haven't. And this is kind of, it keys into what's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, in which when confidence goes up much faster than actual expertise does, or I guess you could call it the tall poppy syndrome. A lot of students have this when they're only in their first year of proper tertiary education, and they think they're experts in it, and they'll get put in their place pretty damn quickly by their teachers. Confidence goes up faster than knowledge does. And that's both the Dunning-Kruger Effect and the Unread library effect, both of which are contained in here and very good sections, well worth your time to read. So one thing I really, really like about this book is its level of kind of, I guess you could call it instructionality. Whereas some books kind of come off as pretentious and they use a lot of allegory and stories, and they don't really directly tell you what you can action on. This book is almost a kind of step-by-step guide into things you can say to get to the bottom of what somebody actually believes. Don't try and blame someone even for their own beliefs. You can kind of ask them, okay, well, what contributed to that particular scenario that led you to this? And there's lots of things like that are well worth exploring. So most of what this book talks about can be called epistemology, or the science of how people know what they know or believe what they believe. And it explores the difference between knowledge and beliefs, and also the idea of knowledge formation and belief formation. And how do you argue someone who has a really hard, entrenched beliefs? And obviously a lot of this is kind of aimed at religious versus non-religious arguments. But one of the really brilliant ideas therein is this concept of asking someone, okay, well, if you could change your mind, what would the evidence to make you change your mind look like? And a lot of people don't really like to think about their own beliefs. They've kind of almost stumbled into them. I mean, especially when it comes to religiosity, a lot of people are they have this stuff forced down their throats before they're actually even capable of critical thought, which it makes it a very hard thing to try and crack open. And they'll get quite angry about it because, a lot of people, once they're entrenched into that mindset, they suffer from what's called confirmation bias, and essentially is that you only look for evidence that confirms your pre-existing beliefs, and everybody suffers from it. And it's just scientists that they have to go into things with a much more open mind, so they know. This is where the idea of things like the double-blind test come from, in that the person who's actually administering the test and the actual subject, neither of them know what's being tested. And quite often, like in medical scenarios, they'll use a placebo on some people and they won't know who got what until all of the results are sorted. But yeah, it is not a good way to establish beliefs. I think due to this book, it really spurred me on to kind of examine what I believe. And essentially, I'm trying to rid myself of all beliefs. Obviously, that sounds a bit weird, but it's either something I know, like I'm trying to just sort things into, okay, I know this for a fact, or I don't know. And if I don't know, is there any point in me making any kind of claim whatsoever? Why can't I just say, I don't know? I'm not losing anything by admitting that. I'm being more honest. So I think that's the better way of doing it. And I'm not claiming to be better than anybody else, but I don't know. I just like thinking about this type of stuff. Okay, so I want to know what you guys thought about this one if you've read it, or any other of James and Peter's books. This was one of my top books of the year. It wasn't written this year, but it was one of the top ones I read this year, and I really, really wish that I had read it much earlier in my life. This is right up there with Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World, in my opinion. It's probably, it straddles the line between psychology and self-development. And I'm going to review Demon Haunted World. That is coming up. I'm waiting for it to get here. which is it's a science book, but it steps a great deal into the mental health and self-development space, in my opinion, and it probably would go down in one of the books that I think should be required reading as kids come into their adulthood, because there is just so much in there. It's a very dense book, and so is this one. There's a lot of actionable material in here. I very highly rate it, and if you read any of the books that I have reviewed, make sure that this is one of them, because it is absolutely phenomenal and it is full of actionable information. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it's one of my top 5 that I've read this year. And yeah, I think that you should really give it a go. It is definitely worth your time. It preaches integrity and compassion, and I think that we all need a lot more of those in our lives today to get out of the mess that we've created for ourselves in the 21st century. So, I'm Nathan. I think you should read this book, How to Have Impossible Conversations by Peter Bogosian and James Lindsay. This has been Walk It Off. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and go outside. Get better. Be awesome, guys. See you next time.